Hello and welcome back to another video about Star Citizen, which is about discussing Star Citizen's professions. Basically, I had the idea for this video after the interest I had recently gotten from you guys about my Ship Talk series of videos. So I wanted to do a video discussing something that's near and dear to me. You know, how can you get money in Star Citizen? And that's what we're going to be doing in this video today. By comparing the professions that are currently in the game already. But we're not going to be focusing very much on what the payout for each of the professions is right now, because the exact numbers are probably going to change quite a bit before release, because they have changed up until now pretty frequently. But we're just generally focusing on what behavior is associated with the professions and how they work in generally. So it's not a sort of like, how do I get to 1 million alpha UEC in X hours sort of video, which, you know, also do exist, but that's not what I'm going to be discussing here today. In order to discuss the professions, I'm going to be broadly discussing them in 3 categories. First one is going to be barrier of entry, which is basically what sort of equipment or skills do you need in order to perform well at this profession? Then second one is going to be what sort of profit do you expect to earn per hour? And then the third one is going to be some sort of risk assessment. So basically stuff that you would expect to lose if things do not go entirely according to plan, which, you know, things never go entirely according to plan, so you should expect to also be at least a little bit concerned about that. Alright, let's start by doing something that I've been doing quite a bit, which is ship-to-ship combat. Arguably the first implemented proficient that we ever had in the game, which, you know, since the first kind of single-player experience that we're going to get out of this Star Citizen complex is going to be Squadron 42, which is probably going to be very much focused on ship-to-ship combat, though not exclusively just about that. Also, the first iterations of Arena Commander was basically just a testbed for ship-to-ship combat, so it's not surprising that it's one of the most developed and probably one of the more interesting ones. I'm going to be mostly focused on doing bounties, which as of right now in 3.8 are basically telling you how difficult they are by putting it into one of 4 categories. CS1, you basically just expect to be fighting against a single small ship. I think in most cases it's going to be a Mustang, but I have also seen others on occasion. In CS2, you're probably going to be fighting 2 small ships, probably also both going to be a Mustang again for whatever reason. And then in CS3 is where things become a lot more interesting, because you can pretty much face anything from a Buccaneer to a Caterpillar, and your mission target can also be either of those in a large spectrum of ships, including the Buccaneer, Cutlass, Constellation Andromedas, Valkyries, and the Caterpillar. So, and then the most difficult one, CS4, is where things can get really crazy, and you can also have hammerheads and even more of those bigger end of ships. Basically, the more difficult the bounty mission is, the more you get out of it. I think for each category it increases by 500 at this point, which, as we'll get to, is probably not worth the hassle, to be honest, in most cases. But let's talk about barrier of entry for this profession. So, as you can see, the missions vary a lot. So, obviously, what kind of ship that you need at least to be able to deal with that also depends a lot on what sort of mission that you want to do. Because, you know, just for the CS1 and CS2 mission, you can probably still do them in a starter ship or in a slightly advanced starter ship without too many issues or modifying equipment. But when you get to the CS3 level and higher, you're probably looking at sitting in a dedicated combat ship with some modifications. So in order to deal with those, if you don't have a ship of that specific caliber, you're probably starting to look at buying some rental ships for about 30k a day. So that's something to keep in mind at least. And let's now talk about the profits that you expect to earn from this. It used to be quite a lot in 3.7, where you could realistically make 60 to 80k in an hour. This has been corrected downwards quite significantly by just reducing the mission payouts. You know, the sort of CS4 equivalent type missions gave you 10,000 in 3.7. Now they give you 3,000, I believe, or was it 3.5? But something to that amount, which is not that much. And the mission just below that is just then 2,500 instead of the 8,000 that you had before. So you might expect me to say it's really bad now because the payout is not great. Also, the NPCs have been reacting a lot better recently, so how can that still be worth it? And the answer to that is Call to Arms. Call to Arms is a new mission that was included in 3.8, which basically you can kind of imagine you sign up for sort of citizens militia that basically signs up to promise to deal with pirates, and then for every pirate you kill you get some bonus amount from the government because they didn't have to send police or military forces out to deal with that deal with that pirate, so you get some sort of extra bounty money. And that mission actually makes things a lot more interesting because of the way it works together with the bounty missions. From what I've seen, and there's also lots of bugs that may seem it works differently, but from what I've seen, the bounty target and its accompanying ships do not count for the Call to Arms mission as extra payments unless you take out the main bounty target first and then its accompanying ships later, which I guess is a good reason to just stick around and not just pull out in your stealth torpedo bomber, just nuke the target and then move on to the next target, leaving the rest of the pilots the rest of the pirates alive. So I guess it might make some sense in that way, that it kind of wants you to encourage to stick around and clear out the rest of the criminals. Not sure if that's how it's supposed to work, because with some of the more difficult missions where your target might be sitting in a caterpillar or a hammerhead, you probably want to take out its escorts first before you want to deal with the rest, and especially considering the amount of time involved in the mission just makes those missions very unprofitable, because first you have to deal with the escorts, for which you're getting paid nada, and then you have to deal with the target, for which you're just going to get paid the mission amount, which is not really enough for the time and ammo that you're probably going to be spending on those. So from what I've seen, I'd actually prefer to do to the chain doing the CS2 and CS3 sorts of missions. CS2 is just nice because you just have two small ships, so it's pretty easy to just take out the one mission target first and then deal with the second one and get some extra payment for that, which is often another 500 or 700 UEC. And for the CS3, it's similar. In some cases, your mission target can be in a Buccaneer, which is easy to take out first, and then you can also get bonus payments for the rest, which significantly, ups the amount of payment that you get out of the mission. So doing that is pretty nice. On top of it, I would also recommend doing those missions in an area where you can get quantum interdicted, because what's also a really neat thing about Call to Arms is that when you get quantum interdicted by pirates, you're not just, okay, I'm just gonna go on, see you later guys, but you can actually stick around and take him out and get paid for it, which is pretty great. And this way, if you do missions in the area around Hurston, for instance, while going between your mission targets, you can also get stopped by pirates on occasion, often resulting in a lot of extra money for little additional effort. So that's all generally pretty nice. I've been able to make consistently at least 40 to 60k per hour this patch with, Call to Arms plus the mission. There's also, if you want to be really abusive about it, there's also a chance that you can accept Call to Arms more than once, because even if you have the mission, it can still show up for some reason, which is probably going to be a bug that's going to be fixed. But if you just accept it again, then you can sometimes even get 2 payments for just taking out one target, which feels, which just should make you feel real bad about all that money that you're getting, by milking the government twice, right? Anyway, let's also discuss risks just a little bit. Normally, the risks are pretty minimal, because if your ship gets destroyed, if something goes wrong and your ship gets destroyed in one of those bounty missions, you do get your ship back in the same configuration that it was before. So basically you only lose some playtime, and maybe you want to pay some insurance money to get out quicker and all of that. However, there still seems to be a small chance of the ship just reverting to its original form, which, depending on what ship you're using, might be a huge issue or not. Like if you're using a freelancer and you just modified one of the shield generators for something better, then it's not going to be a huge deal. But if you did the missions in, like, let's say a Hornet, and you invested 250,000 in order to make that Hornet combat ready, then, you know, reverting to the basic default loadout is going to be a huge problem, because you basically just threw 4 to 5 hours of your life away for pretty much nothing. You know, except the fun you had, of course. So that's kind of an issue. Also, in some of the PTU patches, I've had an issue where you could just permanently lose equipment in just one slot, which was an issue for my Constellation Andromeda, because if you lose one of the guns attached to the lower nacelles, then you can just not replace them, because you also lose the attached gimbal mount, which is sort of fixed and you can't change. And even if you lose it, you still can't change it, so you just have an empty slot that you can't do anything with. So, just saying, it's not quite as risk-free as some might want to claim it is, but in general, it's pretty good. Speaking of risks, let's talk about trading next. Trading, the supposed big money maker. That is, unless you lose everything you have, or you don't even have the means to really do it because you don't have one of the few ships that can do it, basically. There was an interesting statistic that CIG posted recently, where a lot of people were kind of moaning, trading makes so much money, damn it. Because the first graph basically showed how much money people made by selling commodities at consoles, which vastly outperformed, you know, mission payments. But that is just, you know, half the story, because the money you get out of those terminals also means you invested some money before that in order to be able to sell something somewhere else. So we'll get back to that anecdote in a few minutes. But before that, what's the barrier of entry here? Well, basically you need a ship with cargo space, which tend to be not too many ships actually. And depending on what kind of commodities you want to peddle, I'd recommend you want to be having at least a cutlass. Anything smaller than a cutlass is pretty much only worth your time if you're smuggling drugs. But ideally you'll probably want to be looking at either a Freelancer Max for some of the medium-range goods, or a Caterpillar for, you know, for the real bulky hauls. Also, on top of having one of these ships, you also need to be able to invest quite a bit of money. So depending on the route, you need to have like something of at least 50k, probably something closer to 200 or 300k in your bank account. And probably even more, because you don't want to invest all your money, because that creates issues in and of itself. And another main issue that I want to bring up here is you can buy both the Freelancer Max and the Caterpillar in-game for like something around 2 million for the Max and 4 million for the Caterpillar, but you can't rent them for whatever reason. You can rent the base Freelancer, but the base Freelancer only has 66 SEU, which is not that great compared with the 120 the Freelancer Max has. So you also have this kind of paywall in there that unless you already have those ships in your game package or as standalone ships, it's going to be quite a significant time investment to just be able to use any of those in game. So let's talk about profit. You know, trade is supposed to be having a huge profit, and what kind of route you want to be using with the ship depends a lot on what kind of ship you have. On the lower end, you know, like something around a Cutlass, maybe a Freelancer, you probably have heard of the route peddling metals from HDMS Bezdek on Ariel to Lorville, which is a route that, if you can carry about 100 SEU of goods, should give you something in the order of 30 to 35k per hour, which is a pretty decent payout. However, this route doesn't scale up very well, because at some point you'll be having issues just buying that much for your Caterpillar, so you can't just go and say, okay, but I have a Caterpillar, so I'm just doing the same in the Caterpillar, because there's just not enough material to go around, and you're probably going to be running into issues there. Another route that's even more profitable on paper is just peddling meds to Lowell, probably from Deacons, or what's the name of the other medical supply generator? I forgot, sorry. But doing that, I've been able to make like 60k in an hour tops, which sounds like quite a lot of money, and arguably it is. But buying all those meds sets you back for like 100 SCU of those, sets you back like 300k, which can be a problem. And if you have a larger ship, you also don't want to be peddling meds, but there's an interesting different route for larger ships that you probably want to try out, which is to just peddle scrap from Crusader L1 to Port Olisar, which is an interesting little route that if you're just doing that in a freelancer or a constellation, for instance, you're probably just going to be overlooked because, you know, you're just going to get like 14k an hour out of it, which is really not that much. But that's one of the few routes that scales up really well because scrap, there tends to be a lot of scrap around. And you can just buy a whole caterpillar's worth of scrap and it both scales up pretty well. And also the scrap is really cheap. And the profit is also pretty huge percentage-wise, though not just absolute, so that within an hour you basically make up for whatever you have invested into it in the first place. So that's a pretty neat route, but only if you have a caterpillar, which, you know, unless you already had a caterpillar, you're probably not going to be able to do. So I already kind of scratched the surface on risks a little bit. Obviously, the main risk associated with trading is that if anything happens to your ship along the way, you're probably just losing your entire haul, which is a huge issue, you know, because when you're ferrying wares in terms of 300k around, just losing all that is probably going to be setting you back significantly, and it's going to be taking quite a few hours to just earn that whole thing back. Unless you were peddling scrap, which you can basically earn back within an hour, so that seems to be pretty reasonable. But for most of the other wares, I don't really see it, you know, because the servers are still pretty unstable, game still crashes a lot and all that, and there's just so many stories of people just losing stuff and then complaining about it on the forums and, you know, literally anywhere. And even according to CIT's own stats, which I teased in the very beginning of this segment, it seems that on average, players are actually losing attempting to do trading. Because in the same stats that they showed, where trading was like a huge money earner because you generated a lot of money by selling it on trading consoles, you could also see later in a different stat that also people had to you know, invest a lot of money in order to buy those commodities. And if you calculate the numbers, then you see, wait a second, people invested more money to buy commodities than the first graph told us they earned by selling them? That's a problem, you know, because it tells us that on average people lost money doing trading. So, maybe not the greatest profession right now. Anyway, let's now move on to something a little bit more chill, which is transporting boxes. First, basically just transporting boxes. We're going to be doing some boxes plus in the next segment. But for now, let's just take on a mission to pick up a box at place A and bring it to place B. Ideally, this mission is pretty easy to do because you basically just need a ship that, you know, has some interior space where you can put a box down, which most ships have unless they are very combat focused. And when they're combat focused, you can probably do the ship-to-ship combat missions instead. So it does have a pretty low barrier of entry, and but there are currently some issues with some of these ships. Basically, all the ships that have a ladder where you enter your ship, like your Aurora and the 300 series especially, you currently cannot carry your mission box in your hands while moving up that ladder because, I don't know, the animation is broken. It used to work, but right now it just doesn't for whatever reason. And that means that you need to be a little bit more creative to get your box into your ship. In the Aurora, the ladder is so small that you can probably just throw it in through the airlock from outside. So that's not too much of an issue for the Aurora. For the 300 series, because it has such a huge ladder, it's a lot more of an issue. So just keep that in mind. By doing those missions, speaking of profit here, I've been able to make like about 30k an hour by basically transporting about 3 to 4 boxes at any point in time. Just basically ferrying them from Hurston or Arcop area back to Crusader, and then from Crusader back to any one of those former two. Which is still a pretty fine payout, I think. And especially good about ferrying boxes is that you almost have no investment in terms of specialized ships that you need, and also you have little risk, because even in the worst case, if something happens, you basically only lose progress until you basically only lose progress, because you know you may have still had some boxes on your ships that you lost access to, and all that. Since traveling is needed, you also may run into PvP encounters that you're not being equipped for, so your best idea is to probably run, unless you also want to combine it with having call to arms active and then shooting down AI ships, you know, which is a possibility to do, but it depends a lot on your ship. In your non-modified Aurora, you probably don't want to try and attempt that, but if you're doing that in, like, I don't know, a Freelancer Dur or a Constellation or whatever, then you can probably deal with AI along the way and make some additional bucks just shooting them down whenever they appear. So it's pretty decent in terms of just only losing progress and not losing some additional investment or equipment that you've installed into your ships. So it's pretty nice, but still compared to combat, you're probably losing more progress, because based on the nature of the mission, you'll probably be having a mission active for quite a long time, because you're basically picking them up in one planetary system, then moving from one planetary system to the next one, then distributing all of them, and if something happens, you're statistically pretty likely to still have quite a few boxes on board that you picked up like half an hour ago or something. So you lose a little bit more of progress than you would in combat, because in combat you always get paid after each mission. So if you lose after the second mission by just getting shot down, then you did already get payment for the first 5 missions that you did this hour. So but it's still a pretty decent way to earn money. You can also combine that with trading that I discussed earlier, which maybe is a decent halfway measure still. However, in order to do that, you need some pretty decent in-game knowledge of commodities, knowing what you can sell where and what you can buy where, so that you pick your mission targets according to locations that you can still buy some interesting things, and then also make some really quick stops at additional locations where you want to sell everything, probably Port Olisar. Technically, it has a similar barrier of entry as the boxes, but you probably want to have something with at least a decent sized hold, so probably something of a size of a Cutlass or up. Anything lower than that is probably not worth the time to take the detour to Port Olisar to just sell things to just sell things regularly. And if you wanted to do that, you can also just rent a Cutlass for about 35k and just then make your money back by doing this. In addition, unlike the boxes, you also need some additional money up front so that you can buy the commodities, obviously. And doing that, I've still been able to make like at least 35, more realistically 40k per hour, which is decent and a little bit more than just transporting the boxes. But obviously, in terms of risks, it kind of inherits the risks of just losing your entire cargo holds because of bugs, game server shutting down, and whatever. So it is a lot more risky than just transporting boxes. But since you're probably not gonna be buying the most expensive stuff as you would in trading, it's a lot less risky than just pure trading. Also, you get a significant income just on the boxes, so that also helps. So I think it's a little bit more attractive than both just carrying boxes or doing pure trading for ships in the size of like a Cutlass to a non-max Freelancer, because at that point it's probably worth the additional risk and the kind of lack of focus on just doing pure trading. If you have a Freelancer Max or a Caterpillar, then probably trading is better, but it has a risk, that we talked about earlier. Anyway, let's move on to a different profession now, which is mining. Kind of a more chill way of making some pretty decent bucks, actually. But it has a pretty significant barrier of entry, because right now we only have basically 2 very specialized ships, one of which can at least be rented for about 40k per day, the Prospector. And then after that, you may also consider buying additional mining hats, because they can make your mining adventure a little bit easier and also enable you to mine rocks that you may not be able to mine with your standardized mining hat, but it's not strictly needed. What kind of made it difficult for me as someone who doesn't do mining a lot is to get some miners to come clear on what kind of their profit earnings are, because by nature mining varies a lot, because you're never guaranteed to find a decent rock in like 15 minutes. Whereas in trading, I'm going to go to that outpost here. There's some uncertainty about the price that I have to pay here and the profit that I'll be making at my target location. But I'm pretty sure that something's going to be there, which with mining, you're really not. You could be just spending half an hour or even more just looking for one decent rock. And that makes the whole profit per hour thing a little bit more difficult, because it varies a lot. And miners seem to be always very happy to post screens of some insanely profitable huge loads that they sold, but they rarely take the time to talk about how much time it took to find that in the first place and what they expect to make on average. So the best number I've been able to compute is it's something in the domain of 30 to maybe 60k. Apparently, if you do it a lot, you know some decent locations, and you know what to look when you're scanning rocks initially, and you don't need to think too much about it. So if you do it a lot, it might be even more than 60k, but that's the best number that I've been able to get. But another upside for mining is that the risk is also pretty minimal. But if you lose the ship because the game crashes or whatnot before you sold your haul, then you're probably gonna be looking at a lot of time lost, because you might have been just, looking for that rock for half an hour, then mined it, then looked for a second rock, oh no, server crashed, and then you're just back to square one. So, you still lose some progress in terms of, game time invested, but at least, unlike trading, you're not losing additional money on top of that. Because you should be able to keep your ship and your mining head, obviously. Alright, those are the main professions as I see them right now. Let's also quickly talk about some other things that you can do and that are also profitable at some points in your career in Star Citizen, let's say. Investigation missions, I think, are a pretty nice way of making some early bucks if you're not sure if you qualify for any other mission. Like, if you're sitting in a somewhat combat-focused ship, but you're not comfortable enough to deal with bounty missions yet, you're looking to get some money to invest into better guns so that you can do that, for instance. Because for investigation missions, you basically only need yourself. You don't need any additional equipment. Your ship also doesn't really matter. You just need your ship to take you somewhere, and then you're probably going to be spending some time in EVA doing something. So, they kind of require the least in terms of equipment, and so they're decent for earning your first few bucks so that you can spend them on upgrades or just renting a loaner for a day to really go into earning some serious money later down the line. Also, there's FPS combat. The payout for FPS combat focused missions is actually not bad, but you always have the risk of, if something goes wrong, losing your weapons, because if you hold it in your hand while dying, which if you're in a first-person combat situation is pretty likely, you may lose your gun on top of of having to go back there to continue doing the mission. And right now, FPS weapons also have a lot of issues where just reloading might not work, they might not fire in inopportune moments, which can create a lot of problems for you. So right now, I wouldn't really recommend it, but it's fun to do if you're in a group of people. And also there's this new board 690 jump mission that you can do with other people together. So it's a nice thing if you have other people backing you up, but if you're just playing by yourself, probably not something I'd recommend doing. Also, there's hand mining, kind of as mining's little brother. Also suffers from a lot of bugs right now, so I can't really recommend it this patch, but it might change, you know. So and it used to be a lot more profitable than it is right now. The earnings can still be pretty decent, but so it can be a good source of early income, because you basically, like with investigation missions, you only need yourself, but here you also need just yourself, and then also you need to buy a multi-tool, a mining guide for the multi-tool, and then some armor that can enable you to carry what you mined with the hand mining tool, which all of which together costs like maybe 5 to 6k. So after doing an investigation mission or two, you could basically just move on to doing hand mining. So it's pretty decent for people who are just, you know, flying around with starter ships, looking to make some bucks, to probably rent a better ship or buy one maybe. But buying one is probably going to take quite a lot of time, and you probably want to be looking at renting ships first. But that's about it in terms of professions. Let's summarize a little bit. What, in my opinion, was pretty neat about doing all this analysis was that in terms of UEC per hour, they're pretty close to one another, which hasn't always been the case in previous versions, where sometimes trade was just insanely effective. Then we had some patches where combat was insanely effective. Then we had some where mining was crazy. But right now, they seem to be in a place where you can basically do whatever you like, and the earnings are not that different from one another, which is pretty great, because that way you can specialize on what you like best, and, you know, get a little bit better payments just because you are able to do it well. But you can also, if you're someone like me who wants to experience as many things as possible, you can also just go around and do combat for a day, then maybe do boxes for another few hours, and then try mining for a few hours before it becomes too boring. I don't know. So it all seems to be in a pretty decent place at the moment, so kudos CIG. Let's hope we're not going to break it in future patches. Well, we'll see. Alright, thank you for listening to me. I hope you like this little bit different format than my usual Let's Plays. I would be very interested in your feedback about it, if you liked it, if you think I should do more about it. If I don't get feedback, I'll probably try and do more about it, but you know, just doing the research for this is gonna be is quite a bit more difficult than just do a Let's Play, you know. So it's probably not gonna be a daily thing. It's most likely also not gonna be just a weekly thing. So well, I hope you can live with that. But thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Have a good one.